J.D. Vance camp is pretty isolationist and it has no time for Ukraine. He was the one that led the ambush in the Oval Office with Trump of Zelensky. And he's discredited anything to do with Ukraine's victimhood or its cause for democracy and that sort of thing. Rubio is an old-fashioned American internationalist. In other words, he believes in diplomacy, he believes in the post-war institutions, he goes about things in a traditional way, he's reasonable, and that sort of thing. And then you've got, Trump, and you've got Witkoff whispering in his ear that, tons of money can be made. The Russians will do business with us. The best way to end the war is to make them partners with us and they won't fight anymore. And, that's not the game. What they don't understand is what Lenin said. Putin is appealing to the greed of capitalism to go for profits and forget national security and morality. What about morality? There's no morality in the Trump position. One day he's with him, one day he's not. And, he could bring all kinds of leverage and pressure to bear on Putin. And apparently he's considering it now, but, who knows whether that's the case. So yes, like all leaders, he's got courtiers that are all fighting and arguing for position and prominence inside his cabal, and that's how it breaks out. And then on top of that, you kind of have an isolationism in America.
It's been pointed out to me that what Donald Trump is now aiming for is a date to get some kind of path towards peace, or whatever you want to call it, before the anniversary of his inauguration, and that's what he's got his eyes on. Now, assuming that it's all off for the moment, because the Russians have, as predicted, said no, the question will be, how does Donald Trump actually react by about mid-January?
I'm kind of interested as to whether he's going to react before Christmas, because I think this would have been his big goal. Let's tie this up with a bow and put it under everybody's Christmas tree. I did it. And then get the Pulitzer Prize in January. I mean, for peace. I don't know what he's going to do. He's very erratic. And I think he's got to be very upset that all this effort has been done by the Americans and the Europeans and the Ukrainians to come up with something that's reasonable, that's also compromising. For instance, Zelensky said, we don't have to join NATO. That's a big giveaway. And so there's been some success on that side of softening the alliance. But for Trump to just turn around, insult them, and just say out of hand, no, I want all of Donbass. And by the way, I'm going to conquer it unless you give it to me.
What about these platinum security guarantees that are now being offered by the US, especially in light of the Budapest Memorandum of 1994, which everybody quotes when you talk about whether or not you can actually rely on security offers?
Yeah, it's got to be a European and an American security guarantee regime. It's got to be both. It can't be one or the other, because just putting down nice words and promises on paper doesn't work when push comes to shove. And that's what happened in Budapest in 1994. And so the whole thing, and Britain and the United States had signed on to protecting Ukraine in the event of it being invaded again. It was invaded in 2022. They didn't send in one troop. They didn't send in anything. Now, they've been very helpful, don't get me wrong. But this time around, the Ukrainians are smarter. So they are angling for boots on the ground, European boots on the ground, or mercenaries, and American watchfulness and intelligence and surveillance. That's what they want.
Because, Diane, you were in Ukraine, I think, at the time of the 1994 Budapest Memorandum, is that right?
I saw the debate in the Verkhovna Rada, their parliament, when they were being asked to sign over their nuclear weapons and give them to Moscow in return for some kind of guarantees. And it went on till 2 a.m. People were screaming at each other. There was fist fights in some corners. I knew history was going on, but, I wasn't that familiar with it. It was something to see. But the Ukrainians darn well knew that this was eventual.
I mean, did you at the time have faith in it? Because it's been pointed out to me that the wording was very important. There was assurances, not guarantees. And that semantics was absolutely crucial.
Oh, yeah. The lawyers had at it. They put in weasel words, they put in loopholes, and they just escaped unscathed. Britain and the United States should have done something after that invasion. I'm talking militarily, as they promised, and they did nothing. So, this time it has to be more assured and it has to be backed up, and I think by both of them somehow.
So how do you think now other countries within Europe and further afield that will be watching Ukraine's future will be influenced as to whether or not it is backed up, supported by its allies? What I'm getting at is, do you think that there's going to be more of a tendency to consider the nuclear option to provide for your own security?
100%. And, just around that time, over the nuclear weapons business, Clinton put pressure on Ukraine. Poland was still kind of an orphan. And Poland said at that point, we want into NATO or we're going to get a nuclear bomb because we do not trust Russia. They said it openly. I would say if this goes along the way it's going now, that if I'm South Korea, I'm Japan, I'm going to get a bomb. If I'm South Africa, I'm going to get a bomb. If I'm Saudi Arabia, I'm going to get a bomb. I mean, this is going to start a stampede of proliferation because nothing is sacred and the post-war order appears to be in shambles and America's word isn't their bond.
Yeah, and throw into that the US national security strategy. How seriously do you take that, and what do you think that is telling the world?
Well, the national security strategy is just a document that actually espouses the algorithm I talked about. And that is that, the capitalists want to make money. They think that's the capitalistic idea is to make money, forget morality and all of that sort of thing, and forget national security. In the new national security deal that Trump's penned, he doesn't see China as a security threat. He sees it as a trading partner or a trading issue. He does not blame Russia for the war because he sees Russia as a future partner in the Arctic and to do resource work in Siberia. The whole thing is infiltrated with this profits before diplomacy mentality. And money's not going to solve it. It's not the right idea. And he's exposing the world to more insecurity as a result of that, as well as the United States itself.
And perhaps, though, in an optimistic sign, the US Senate has passed this major defense bill that would block significant US troop reductions in Europe, pushing back against Donald Trump's efforts to scale down America's long-standing military role on the continent. How hopeful, how optimistic is that, and what can Europe take from that?
Well, I think it's very good. It's a good sign. And it gets back to your original question about what are the forces that are talking and lobbying him. And they're varied. They go from the isolationists, we shouldn't get involved in any wars, let's get rid of our military, to, wait a minute, we should be the world's policeman because eventually it does affect our national security and our welfare as well. So I think that's a very important sign. And, let's also not forget the fact that Europe is almost, I'm talking about all of Europe, not just the EU, but Europe economically is almost the size of the United States and surpassed China this year in size. So it's rich, it's a marketplace. To me, if Trump wasn't deranged somehow, he would say, hey, let's side with Europe. We're going to do landmine business with them, and let's get rid of this Russian problem as soon as we can. I just don't understand his logic.
What more do you think Europe and NATO can do, though, to protect against Putin's move to fracture and break up institutions that underpin democracy at this time?
NATO has to stay united. The European Union has been meeting and is meeting over this frozen assets business. And I think that is going to tell us whether the European Union, the Europe experiment, and the NATO experiment will work. If they can't sign the dotted line to give Ukraine, which is their police force, enough money to last for the next 2 years, then they are going to have not only a security threat hanging over their heads from Russia, but they're also going to probably splinter.
You've been watching Frontline for Times Radio. If you'd like to know more about the war in Ukraine, you can subscribe and sign up for a membership. You can also get more analysis by listening to Times Radio or read thetimes.com. But for now, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.